Hey everyone, my name's Sarah Levon and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I have been waiting to do this video for so long. I don't know what I've been waiting on, but today is the day that I get to tell you all about doulas, what a doula is, what it does, in my role, what that looks like, and how it can be helpful to you, including the evidence on doulas. But before I do that, make sure you subscribe down below and then let me know in the comment box down below if you had a doula, and if you did, what your experience was with your doula, and if you're undecided, or maybe you're still pregnant, or you're kind of figuring it out, where you're at in the decision-making process, what questions you may have, because I may come back in a future Coffee and Questions and answer your questions about doulas. With that, let's get going. The word doula comes from the Greek word that just means female caregiver. In other translations, it could be considered servant, which in some circles, they may not like that terminology. I actually like that terminology. I believe in servant leadership. And that really is, if we're thinking about the role of a doula, it's very much, you are there to serve the pregnant and laboring and birthing person. So I want to talk about what their accreditation is, how to find a doula, what kind of training doulas get, because there is definitely a spectrum. And then I want to describe to you where they fit in the process and sort of like my piece of where I see myself fit, because I do function in a doula role. I am a labor and delivery nurse by background. I quit my job in the hospital over 4 years ago now to start Bundle Birth, a nursing corporation. I'm still a nurse, and so I function as a birth coach. I feel like I need to make this distinction. But what I do is the role of a doula. I do everything that a doula does. Mind you, I am able to offer my nursing knowledge, my nursing education, and my expertise of medical things, medical experience, and then navigating the hospital system to my clients. So there's a little bit of difference there. That's why I call myself a birth coach, but I'm a doula. Okay. And for those of you doulas out there, I hope you find this video very helpful in helping your clients understand what you do. So there are several organizations that provide training and then accreditation for doulas. There is no governing body, governing board, like let's say the Board of Registered Nursing, where I take a licensing exam, I have to get a degree in nursing, I take my exam, I get my license, and I'm held accountable to continuing to maintain my registered nurse license. There's not that. But there's different programs that are going to train doulas. Really, anybody can be a doula. There is no like certain schooling you have to have. You could be 18 years old, straight out of high school, and become a doula. But most doulas are going to have some sort of training. Now, what does that training look like? Depending on the organization, and the big ones I'm going to say are DONA, D-O-N-A, CAPA, and then ICEA. Now, there's other accrediting organizations, and really any program can train doulas. You're going to want to ask what education they did, and if they're certified as a certified doula, what that means to them, and have a conversation about this, because this is not cut and dry. And I will say that there's sort of like two camps going out in the doula world, of ones that like really believe in certification and other ones that are like, I'm there to serve the person. I'm there to help advocate for them. I have a frame of reference for birth, and that certification doesn't really help me in my career. So either way, I am not a certified doula. I'm a board certified registered nurse, which I feel like sort of carries over into what I do as a doula. So ask these questions, and you need to decide, is certification totally necessary for you when you're looking for a doula, or is it not? So to me, you're gonna need to listen to this list and then determine, is certification important to you to have in a doula or not? So for a doula in general to be certified, the most common denominator things are they have to complete a required reading list. They have to read a few books on birth. They have to go to a training program. Usually that's somewhere around 3 days of training. So 3 8-hour days where they learn about being a doula. Part of that is, and I've been to one, is how to do the business of a doula, what do prenatal visits look like. It kind of just walks through like a normal process for a doula. They need to go to a childbirth class. So like when I was teaching in person prior to the pandemic, I taught in the Valley for a really amazing organization and taught childbirth classes, and frequently I would have doulas in my class attending and listening to me teach to help supplement their learning. And then they need to attend 3 births, in order to get some experience. Their birth doesn't count. A friend's birth prior 5 years ago doesn't count. So they may have been to birth and sort of been like dabbling prior, but they need to attend 3 births as the doula and then get positive evaluations from usually the staff members, which is kind of awkward, to be honest, as a doula. For me, at least, it was when I'm thinking about doing this. Now, I used to fill out those evaluations for the doulas as the nurse in the room. And then as a part of those 3 births, they get to be a part of it. They learn, they process. Whether or not they have accountability, whether or not they have mentoring is actually pretty rare in a doula world. So that to me, when I'm thinking objectively about this and sort of like seeing the spectrum of doulas, because I've worked in LA as a labor and delivery nurse where doulas would come in and I'm watching them be a doula with their clients, there is a spectrum of experience levels. There's a spectrum of comfort in the room. There's a spectrum of approach. And so when you're looking for a doula, you want to ask about their training. You want to ask about how many births they've been to. Now, I will say that I don't think that the number of births matters as much as their personality and their heart and their perspective on birth, because I think really anybody can help with birth as long as they're attuned to you. But once you look at their experience, that to me plays more into the number of births or the training that they've had. But you want them to have some sort of training, because the role of a doula at the bedside is to fill in the gaps. Okay, let me explain what this means. This is sort of my perspective of what I've learned in being in this role. You have doctor or midwife who is guiding care. They are using their medical knowledge, their years of experience, their years of schooling and training to sort of look at the big picture and help keep you and your baby safe, to make medical recommendations throughout the care, to place doctor's orders and say, yes, this is what I approve, or no, this doesn't feel safe, and then watching you throughout your pregnancy. While you're in labor, you have the labor and delivery nurse that's there to keep you and your baby safe and to carry out those doctor's orders. So they are in and out of the room. They typically have 2 patients they're managing. They are working for the hospital and the doctor in this teamwork environment where they are helping to usher your experience to a safe outcome. Okay, hopefully healthy birth memory along the way, but that's my extra bonus. So what happens is you show up to the hospital with your partner. Your partner has some sort of frame of reference. Hopefully you've taken a childbirth class. If you haven't, you're like, I have no idea. Oh my goodness. You've come to the right place, because I have all sorts of programs for you. So make sure you're taking a childbirth class. But the problem is that labor is weird. Okay. When I say flex and flow in all of my videos, that is obviously something that we can use for life, but that is particularly important when we think about labor. Labor is never textbook. Yet it's totally textbook, right? Like there's a process that happens, but what that looks like and the different variations and what your options are and coping with labor and all of that is so varied. I've never seen one birth go exactly the same as the next, and I've been a part of over 5,000 births. So with that, it is a ton of pressure on the partner to help you navigate medically, the medical system, navigate the team, know how to cope, know what's normal versus not normal when they've never seen it before in labor. Let me tell you, especially without an epidural, but even with an epidural is very weird and brings out all sorts of emotions. It's vulnerable, it's raw, it's such a unique experience that I love, but it's a lot of pressure for that partner. So they're your main emotional, physical support, but they're also the layer of this is their experience as well. This is not just like some random person off the street that they don't care about. This is somebody that they're highly invested in, that likely is their DNA in their partner, and they're looking at a situation that may potentially be risky, may be scary, may be unknown, may be loud, may be weird. So the gap where a doula fits into me is everything else. To me, when I think about my role, that my job is to help the partner engage with the birthing person and then fill in all the gaps. I'm watching the team dynamics, and then I'm being a steady, constant presence through the pregnancy, carrying the relationship from pregnancy into the entire birth, no matter how long it takes. And in that, however long that labor takes, I'm filling in the gaps. I'm helping them answer questions. Is this normal? Yes, this is normal. Is this abnormal? Let's call your nurse or doctor about that and ask, is this an option? That's a great question for your doctor or nurse. Let's bring them into this conversation. So I'm helping with the team dynamics. And then also, if there's simple things like I'm not comfortable on my hip, I can give you an option of, okay, you're not comfortable, no problem. I don't need to call the doctor because your hip is uncomfortable, right? Let's adjust your position. Ooh, that massage feels nice. Let's grab your partner, get them something to do so that they're feeling included and not quite so scared. The other thing that we're doing is translating the environment around. That beeping noise. Oh, what's that beeping noise? Right? That beeping noise looks like your IV. It says the battery's low. Right? And how often you hear like a nerd, you're like, oh my gosh, emergency, when the IV pump the battery is low, right? So it's bringing your nervous system into a state of calm by having that safe, trustworthy person there, navigating the system, helping you understand what's happening. And then the huge piece is advocacy. So this is key for you to understand of the role of a doula. The role of a doula is to help you advocate for yourself, not to step in with your care team and tell them what you want. Now, if you are completely averbal, or you're completely in coping land, of course, there are moments when I jump in and I'm like, one of her preferences was XYZ. The nurse or the doctor's like, oh, okay, cool. Instead of you having to speak in that moment if you're fully in the zone. But most of the time, especially once a contraction's over, you're fully present. You can kind of come out of that contraction and engage with the team and then go off into labor land. And so the goal would be that you're making the decisions. A doula would never make decisions for you. And if you have a doula that is making medical decisions for you, that is a huge red flag. That is not their job. And that to me is a safety risk for your pregnancy. This is your birth. This is your experience. It's not their it is their experience because you get to be there. But the job of a doula is to help understand what's the experience that's the dream and how do we realize that in the room and fill in the gaps, right? That if you're alone, and this is another, I'm totally on a rant, but I hope this is helpful. That like a lot of times I'm in the room and people, especially the partners, kind of like, how does this work with you? Like, do you replace me? And like, am I going to feel left out? And the goal with your doula, and this is a great question for them, is how will you include my partner? Because I'm not your partner. I do not have that emotional connection that you have with your partner. I cannot fill that role, but I can fill in the gaps and I can help your partner connect with you, right? And rather than being aware of and concerned about everything outside of your little beautiful bubble of peace that you get during your birth. So the goal of a doula is to understand your experience from the beginning, prior to your birth, when everything is calm, and then help to bring that into your experience, right? If I know that you really love water, like your dream is that you are laboring in the tub with the candles and the yummy essential oils and the good spa music, I am going to remember that in the thick of labor and say, why don't we get in the tub? Let's see if that's an option. Right? Rather than, oh yeah, I totally forgot. Oh my goodness, I wish I would have done that. That I get to remember that stuff. The other piece is that continuous labor support. So nurses change shifts every 12 hours. I know for me, it was really hard for me to change shifts when I bonded with a client, but we could labor for 12 hours. You could be 10 centimeters about to start pushing and I'd have to go. And a new nurse sweeps in who's a new face, really a stranger to you, that has to build rapport very quickly. You may or may not know your doctor ahead of time. Most doctors actually don't deliver. They don't guarantee that they'll be at the delivery. They work with a team. Whoever's on that day comes in and delivers you. So you have this team of strangers really in the room. But the doula provides that continuous level of expertise. They know you, they know your preferences, they know your heart, and then they're that constant that carries you literally from laboring at home, which also they can help you know when to go to the hospital, all the way to birth, potentially breastfeeding help. I know I like my clients to latch before I leave, and then even have that follow-up postpartum support. So to me, doulas fill this gap in the team and it's really important that they know their role in filling the gap in the team, that they're not a medical provider. They're not providing medical expertise or advice, but they're providing that emotional and physical support to help you cope through your labor and birth. And by cope, I think we always think of like coping with labor, like the pain, contractions, whatever. And yes, there's massage and touch techniques. They can help provide their expertise of what can help labor keep going. And if it's really long at home, how do we like navigate different positions or the whole physiologic birth side? And I do train birth workers in that as well. And so there's the coping side on that side, but more importantly is the coping and the psyche aspect of what they do in bringing you down and helping you connect, helping you feel safe and free to be yourself and fully accepted in a very non-judgmental environment, which leads me to another point that when you're searching for a doula, you need to be able to feel like you could poop in front of them. And that sounds like a very random thing, but if you think about it, like there are very few people that I feel comfortable pooping in front of. And so it needs to be that layer of intimacy that if you want to be naked and flail around, if you poop while you're pushing, or if you are angry or snappy or, concerned about what you look like, that's probably not the safest person to have in your room. They need to be the most non-judgmental, fully accepting, there for you to jump in whatever way. And I will say, like even doulas that I've worked with, or even myself, that if my client needed counter pressure and all she could do is sit up, I have gotten behind them in the bed in squat position and pushed on their lower back to help them cope with the contractions. I've gotten behind the toilet. I've gotten soaked in the shower with them, and it's sort of like whatever it takes to get you there, I'm going to be there with you in moments where you may not be coping, or especially if you're trying to go without an epidural or you're doing it without an epidural, that I come in and I am a coach in that moment where we're in it together. Look into my eyes. All you have to do is breathe in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. And through my eyes, I'm telling you, you are so strong. You are powerful. And yet I get it. And I'm right here with you. Everything is harder done alone. And so it brings this layer of protection and community into your birth that's not your partner, right? Again, to be very clear, your partner fills a role of that connection and that intimacy that you already have. This is your experience. And the doula is the outer layer to help fill in the gaps. And when the partner's overwhelmed and that you're screaming bloody murder, trying to be like, the baby's coming, and they're freaking out, that you both can look at the doula and I can look at you and say, this is normal. You're doing so amazing. And the partner's like, this is normal. There's no way this is normal. Oh my God. And I'm like, no, it's actually really good. This is normal. He's like, okay. But it's that trustworthy voice to help you not look at your birth saying, this was awful. Oh my gosh, I thought she was dying. When really, like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is great. She's doing amazing. They're like, what? But you trust them enough in order to listen to their advice and help translate the scenario that's very weird into something that can be really beautiful and really memorable. So to be clear, a doula does not replace your medical staff, your doctor, your midwife, your nurse. They all have very valuable roles to play. They do not perform clinical or medical tasks like vaginal exams or fetal monitoring. They are not a clinical person unless they have a license and they have some sort of release. Even that, I don't really do that either. Okay, they do not provide medical advice. So if you're needing medical advice on medications, on plan of care, on induction of labor, on C-section versus vaginal delivery, they're not the one advising you. And this is where, like, to be very clear, that's what your medical team is for. What they do is they help translate the information. They help you get the knowledge. They help you remember to ask the questions about risk, benefits, alternatives. And then they may slow things down sometimes and be like, do we have a moment to sit and just let them marinate on it? I use that all the time. And the provider, the team is usually like, yeah, great, no problem. And then we sit and then we just hash it out. A lot of times nurses will ask me, like, what do you talk about when you take a moment? And honestly, I'm like, how do you feel? But it's that layer of humanity that's added with a resource that is just yours. I don't belong to the hospital. I belong to you in that moment. Really, my job is to help make sure that you are getting the information you need. And if there's a gap that we're identifying, I just am worried about this. Is this a thing? I'd be like, great question for your team. Let's call them back in here and let's bring that to their attention. And then you feel validated to bring it to their attention. And then you have this conversation. I had a recent client who was a VBAC and she decided to be a induced because she had a really big baby. Again, if you see my big baby stuff, like flex and flow in this, but she really truly had an enormous baby the first time around, and this baby was measuring very big. And so she went in for an induction, and the induction, literally nothing happened. Like no change, zero, nothing. She never felt one painful contraction on being maxed out on PIT for 2 days, off and on like on Pitocin, which causes contractions. So at the end, I came in and we had a full heart to heart, and she just, had some tears, and it was like, you could go home, and this is what her care team said. Her doctor was amazing. Her doctor said, you could go home. You could go home and wait for labor. You could go home and we could try an induction in like 4 or 5 days, or we can have a C-section. She had lots of options, right? And then we sat on that. We took our time. They gave her plenty of time. And then we identified there were multiple things she was concerned about. She really wanted skin to skin. She wanted that moment of immediate care that was with her baby that was lost with the first one. She wanted her partner to be in there for the spinal anesthesia, which this is flex and flow, that's rare. But she had concerns about the recovery. She had all these things. We put together a list. We called the entire team back in, and she was able to say, this last time is what I didn't like. What can we do to make a different scenario, right? But she also had me guiding her to be like, I've seen it. Yep, I can imagine that would be possible, but your team needs to know you. And if you don't have someone helping you advocate for yourself and validating your experience, you may not get what you want or what's important to you. And it completely reframed the scenario. She had a beautiful healing birth memory, a non-traumatic C-section. She is super bonded to her baby with no postpartum follow-up. And her team came together with me kind of being the guiding post of slowing things down. Let's talk about it, bring it all together. Okay. So I wasn't intervening in clinical care. I was helping navigate the clinical care. That's not my job as a doula. All right. They need to focus on you and your needs, helping to fill in the gaps. Thanks everyone for being with me here today. I am going to have to come back for round 2 because I got real ranty on that one, but I hope you found that really helpful in sort of giving you a realistic picture of what a doula can do. Now, mind you, this is not all a doula does. And if you've had one before, let us know in the comment box down below, what was the most helpful thing that your doula did for you while you were in labor, and why was it such a benefit to you? And then I'm gonna come back for part 2. Right now, I'm gonna go into that on a second part, and you can come back next week for that, where I talk about the evidence on doulas, because I've talked about their role now, but there's actual clinical evidence on how they can help you potentially have better outcomes. So make sure you subscribe down below, follow me on Instagram for more updates and education over there so that you never miss this future video. I will announce it on Instagram, and then I will be back for a part 2 on the evidence on doulas. Thanks everyone for being with me here today. You know the spiel. Go down to the description box. There's all sorts of stuff down there, including like Amazon lists. I will link the main locations for finding a doula. And then I think probably in part 2, I will talk about finding a doula and interviewing a doula. Where do you go? How do you get one in part 2? So make sure you subscribe. And then until next time, don't forget to flex and flow, and I will see you soon. Bye. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold your horses. You're almost 50. That doesn't make you my dad. You were the teenage pregnancy, and I was like the normal life pregnancy. But before I do that, make sure you, in a future Coffee and Questions, and answer your questions. I was on a roll. A doula, I have nothing else to say other than let's get going, and I messed it up. The pregnant person, along the pregnant person. They help along the pregnant person. They help them along. Was it helpful? Was it not?